Good morning. I'm Nicole Ringgold. I don't know if you have ever, when you're walking the beach, picked up a sand dollar that has a barnacle on it like that. Whenever I find something like this, I just think, I have to make it. I have to fabricate it. So I've already shown you how to make barnacles. You'll have to scroll back through my tutorials to see that. But in this tutorial today, I'm going to show you how to make the sand dollar. And it's probably one of the easier hollow forms you could ever think about making, which you might not imagine, but it's true. And so this is what it looks like with the barnacle. And I'll talk you through in the end how to attach the barnacle to the sand dollar. Anyway, that's what we're doing today. Otherwise, let me know if you have any questions. I'll, as always, do my best to try to answer them as quickly as possible. And thank you to Rio Grande for sponsoring my YouTube channel. Look at the details of this tutorial for the discount code that you would receive for your shipping. Thank you. Let's get going. You'll start with 22 gauge sheet. This is half hard. And then I used a permanent marker to trace around a circle the size of the sand dollar that I'm hoping for. For 22 gauge sheet, you can refer to this chart, Green Lion Studios. 22 gauge, there's a range here, and I'm going to go right in the middle. I'm going to use a 3/0 saw blade. Always remember that when you're sawing to hold the saw like it's a bird. You don't want to choke the bird. That will help you relax all the way up into your shoulders. I'm annealing the silver. Even though it's dead soft, it's probably dirty, maybe not porous, and annealing is my foolproof way of ensuring that the solder will flow. So I've got a light or a soft flame here, and I'm gently heating it until when I pull away, the gray of the silver turns black. You can refer to my previous tutorial on how to use the Little Smith oxypropane torch so that you can learn more about this technique. And then from here, I take the annealed silver and I place it in the pickle, and then I quench, and then I'm ready to move forward. If you don't have a super cool, pretty expensive miniature stake set, then you can use a dapping pin in a vise. This is the top disc of what will be my sand dollar, and I'm hammering it using a nylon hammer over the pin. Make sure that you're hammering consistently and that every single portion of that silver is hammered. As long as you annealed your piece and then pickled it, you can see when you look at your silver that as you are hammering, it will turn back to gray, which means that it's work hardened. So I'm going to point out the white spots like there. Here, I'll use something a little bit sharper so you can see there. That's white. And then there's some other white spots, and that means that those are still soft. Those are the areas that I have not yet hammered. So I can continue to do that before I'm worried about my piece cracking. Again, I'm using a nylon hammer, but you can use a rawhide mallet or a rubber hammer. And that will ensure that your metal does not work harden too quickly. But let's say that you do happen to have miniature stakes. The ones that I use are made by Frets, and they are, frankly, delicious. The technique will be the same as using the upside down dapping pin that I have in the vise, but instead you'll have a little bit more control, especially over the shape. Do make sure that you're noting the color of your silver as you're hammering, because if it turns gray, you'll want to re-anneal before you continue. I anneal, pickle, quench, dry off my silver, and then continue to hammer. The color of the silver as it changes is your biggest hint on when to re-anneal. If you do have the Frets miniature stakes, or if you don't, they are highly desirable and worth it. They come with miniature vices that you secure to a sturdy table. Each of the miniature stakes fits within. Here I'm going to use a wide mushroom stake that resembles the dapping pin when it's placed upside down in the vise. And I'm making sure I'm using the same technique where I'm hammering consistently the entire way all across the surface of the upper portion of the sand dollar. And again, I'm watching the color of the silver shift. I can see there's still a lot of white there, which means that the silver's soft, but as it turns gray, it's work hardening. And you want to stop and re-anneal if you plan on continuing to ensure that your silver does not crack. Once you're done forming the top portion of the sand dollar, you can move over to drilling. So here I've used a permanent marker, and I'm going to use a 0.5 millimeter drill bit, which is tiny, to drill 4 holes. These are going to be my breathers, or my pinholes, that ensure that when I solder the 2 layers together, it does not explode on me. Next, I'm going to use a crosscut cylinder burr to carve in the details of that texture, and I'm going to use one of the smaller crosscut cylinder burrs in this 12-pack set. I did forget to mention that after forming that top layer, I annealed it, pickled it, quenched it, so that it was soft for me to carve into. I'm using the crosscut cylinder burr like a pencil. I'm using the edge of the burr to carve the pattern into the silver. As you can see, I'm anchoring my hand on the table, which gives me a lot more control so that as I'm carving, my burr does not skid across the silver. Now I'm going to use sandpaper, and I'm going to sand down the bottom of this upper portion of the sand dollar. That way it will be flush when I solder the 2 pieces together. Take the upper portion, using hard solder, flip it upside down, flux. I use Mighty Flux from Rio Grande. And then I will use the hard solder. I'm going to sweat it around the rim, which you'll understand here in a moment. If you're pick soldering, heat your solder, not your pick. Make sure that your pick is nice and clean and not hot. Picking up the hard solder, transferring it over to the metal. It will leave your pick when the metal is hot enough because solder follows heat. And as you can see, all I'm doing is placing the solder on the edge. I'm leaving it as a ball, each one as a ball, until they're all on there. And then eventually I will go back and ensure that they're puddled, not balled. The benefit of doing this is as I'm heating the silver, I'm not burning off the flux before I have a chance to transfer all the balls from my soldering platform to the silver. So then once all of the solder is transferred from the soldering platform to the silver, I will then, oh, that one slipped down. Here I go, this is probably my last piece. Then what I can do is heat the silver even more and ensure that the solder is puddled, not just balled. Turning up my torch just a little bit and going around and heating the silver, ensuring that the solder is puddled. If it's balled, it will just fall off. Once that's done, I'll pickle, I'll quench, and then I'll need to reflux. As I'm soldering hollow forms together, I love using the titanium quad by Lion Punch Forge. It allows me to be able to heat from below and on top. As you can see, I'm using the Mighty Flux, and I'm fluxing everything that my torch touches. I don't only flux where I want the solder to flow, because when you're soldering, if you flux the entire piece, then you can actually watch the changes in the color of the silver. But if you don't, it'll just oxidize, and it's a lot harder to become a silver wizard. So just note that I put the solder on the upper side, so gravity is going to be working, hopefully, helping benefit me. I'm heating primarily from below to draw the solder from that upper form down to the bottom sheet. And when all of the solder flows, you don't have to worry about the whole piece blowing up because I have 4 tiny, tiny pinholes on the top. And then let's say your solder doesn't flow all the way around because, I don't know, let's just say that the metal warps and then you're left with it not being flush. I do sometimes have extra solder on the side of my work platform. Here I can take some of that hard solder and I can use my pick to make sure that I've got a tiny bit of weight, not too much pressure, and ensuring that they are actually touching or flush so that the solder flows. And now here I'm going to point out, you can see the colors of the silver. The yellow, slight yellow hue, that means solder flow point, and the black, that means there's no more flux, which is close to melting point. So if I had continued to heat those spots, my silver would be melting. So at that point, you want to stop, probably either pickle and reflux. You can see on the bottom, there's the yellow and the black. That black means no more flux. It's oxidized. So therefore, your solder will not flow. Moving forward, I'm using the same 3/0 saw blade, sawing out the extra portion of the lower part of the sand dollar. Make my way all the way around, and then I'll turn it over and I'll use a drill bit, twist drill, any size, it really doesn't matter. And I'm going to drill a hole in the back. Then use a pencil or a Sharpie and draw lines, which then you can carve out using really any size ball burr. Here's a ball burr. And I use that. And again, you've got to make sure that your silver is annealed, because otherwise you will, as you're carving, dull your drill bits. I'm using the ball burr to widen the hole that I drilled. And then I'll use it to also carve out those fine lines that you would see when you turn over the sand dollar and look at the bottom. I'm not sure you can see that very well, so I'm going to zoom in and give you a closer look. Then I use separating disc or a cutoff wheel. The manufacturers sometimes change the name. This one is called a cutoff wheel. There's the product code number that I get from Rio Grande. And I'm going to use this to shave down or sand down more quickly than a sander does these sides and ensure that they are nice and smoothed out. They're going to look a little rough, a little sanded. So once that's done, switch over to a black silicone disc. Repeat these steps. Make sure you're wearing a mask because the silicone disc does create quite a bit of nasty dust. Then transition to a coarse fiber wheel, and I use that to go across what I've just sanded down and the entire surface, both the top and the bottom of the sand dollar. I think it looks so beautiful, this brushed finish. It also allows, if you do liver of sulfur, the silver to absorb it more when you use this brushed finish. Then I heat my piece with an annealing flame and use my room temperature liver of sulfur, and I paint it on there. And then again, go through the steps to polish, which I include in previous videos that you might just want to refer back to. If you'd like to include a barnacle, please refer back to that tutorial. You can take your barnacle and solder a pin with 16 gauge wire to the bottom of the barnacle using hard solder. Drill a hole all the way through your sand dollar using a drill bit that fits exactly the 16 gauge wire. Thread the barnacle with the 16 gauge wire through your sand dollar, and then you can solder it on the bottom side and snip it off. I will show you those details in a later tutorial. But this is it for today. I hope you enjoyed. Feel free to ask questions, leave comments, and thank you again to Rio Grande for sponsoring my channel. Have a great day.